With the amplifier racked on, I've mounted the amplifier into place. It's time to wire up this. The first thing I want to do is wire up the 6x9s that are located here and here. For that I have a set of purple and a set of green speaker wires. Green will be driver, purple is passenger. I want those to come in along here next to this part of the amplifier because their terminals are located here and here. I don't need to bring them down, around, and up. They're just going to go off and across. We will be using the wire ruler to do that. When using the wire ruler, there's about 1/8 of an inch between where the first hole goes and the outside of the ruler. I want to get as close to this as possible. To do that, I'm just going to be using the wire ruler as a guide. There's a line that comes down from each one of these so that you can find the center point of it. There's 2 ways that you can do this. One is to use an awl and simply mark by pushing into place where you'd like your hole to be and then coming back in and drill in your hole. Or if you're confident enough in your ability, you can just use the drill bit to line it up and drill in the hole. With that first row of holes in place, we only gonna need about 1/16 of an inch between the edge of this amplifier and where we want to drill our next hole. Use that line to line up into the center of each one of the existing holes and mark and drill your next set of holes. Connect my wire into these Phoenix connectors. It's a really small hole. How it's designed is there's a top piece here, and as you tighten up the screw, it clamps the wire in place. I just like to tin my ends, trim them to length so that they fit into this input nice and flush, and then tighten them down. I also want to cover my wire with some braided loom. And on the end here, I'm adding some purple heat shrink to give it a nice finished look. Now I'll repeat the process on the opposite side. And with the wire dressed, it's time to add in the zip ties. Now we have to add in the zip ties. This is one of those times where you have to think about what you want to do for your look. Because the bottom here is going to be visible into the trunk, even though it's up high, which not at eye level, and unless you get down low and look at it from here, you're never gonna see this. But then again, you'll never see the top of this. Where do you want the heads to fall? On the back side here or on the top side here? After discussing it with Fernando, he would like to have the zip ties on the top up here, which I'm perfectly fine with. I also don't want my top to block the hole of my next zip tie line. What that means is that if I'm going to build off of these holes this way, I don't want this to block that next hole. I want the head to be closest to this amplifier. To do that, I'm going to put this through the hole closest to me, bring it around up through the hole closest to the amplifier, line it up in place, getting that head as close to this amp as I can, pull it until it's tight, and using flush cutters, remove the head. Repeat the process all the way down the amplifier, dress up the green wire, this one, and do the same on this side. And that's the finished product. Their pigtails hanging off to the side. Once we get it in, we'll add the corresponding ends in place, plug them up, and be done. Normally, I would continue on with the front, the sub. I would just get this corner of it done. However, that's not always the case. I mean, you just can't always just do that. For this, I really need to concentrate now on getting the power wire in, because that's gonna come off like this and move across here. It's gonna leave this portion here for the RCAs to come around and down, but I also need to run my front speaker wires out and over this way. They're not gonna be going down the passenger side of the car because there's a factory amplifier underneath the driver's front seat that these are gonna need to integrate into. All the signal and everything will still be over here. The bass knob will come this way. These are all gonna be going like this, and I need to get this area blocked off for what the 4 gauge is going to take up, so I know how I can bring these out and over into the amp board. 12 volt is first, ground is second. I've already dressed up my 12 volts and the flex loom heat shrink ferrules on the end, lining them up into place. The ground is done up the same way. I don't have to worry about the remote turn on yet. That is going to run with the RCAs. I want these to stay up like this with this pass through underneath it. To do that, I'm going to build a riser here and a riser here to hold those up, and then we'll drill holes along here to zip tie both these wires where they're stacked on top of one another like this. The reason why I want to stack them is so that they pull flat up against that back panel of the car. There's no reason to put them like this because then I'll just have to twist them. So if I can pre-get them the way I want it, all the better. The ground will be on the bottom and the positive will be on the top. And it'll look something similar to this in its makeup. To make this riser, I'll be using a piece of 1/2 inch. First one needs to be 3/4 of an inch. The second one is going to be a little bit lower just because of how it's turning sooner. And this is what we end up with, is just a little square. Put it in place, drill on either side of it. I'll need a longer zip tie for this. We'll go to the 8-inch to make sure it doesn't slide all over the place. Some Tessa scrapbooking tape. Position it where we want it, press it into place, pull the zip tie tight, and we'll repeat the same process for the ground. First zip tie in is going to be to hold this angle. It'll also be our starting point for the rest of the holes we're going to drill. The 8-inch zip tie we're going to be using for these to be stacked on top of one another is a little thicker than the 4-inch zip tie. For that, on here we tell you to switch out to the 5/32 drill bit, which is the size of the holes. So you can just pre-drill them with the 5/32 if you want. For these, I want the heads towards this side. That means I'll thread these through towards the amplifier and back around. Get it lined up, pull it tight, flush cuts, and proceed down the amplifier. With that done, that frees us up this area here. More specifically, this area. This is what I was concerned with and what I needed to know how much this was going to affect. We have the sub wire, which is going to come out here, the bass knob, and the speaker wire. Bass knob is the farthest one out, which would make sense to bring it in close to this power wire, something like this here. And that would leave us a little gap between the power wire and the speaker wire, and then just put the two speaker wires, the sub and the front, next to one another, and they would go off in this direction. Keep in mind right now in the car, the way it's set up is that in each wiring harness on the left and right side of the car, there's tons of power wires along with the existing speaker wire. It's just crazy how much this all just kind of wraps around itself. So we're not going to have any issues running the wire where we're running it, but more or less just comes down to having it make sense here. With the bigger holes that we drilled, it is enough to fit a Ford into it. If we bring our wire down and over, from here down, we need to drill our next set of holes for the bass knob. We're also going to need some holes along here. For that, we'll use a shorter version of the wire ruler, and we'll use our pick tool to line it up, poke where we want our holes to be. With these holes drilled, we want the head of the zip tie to go in this way. So that means we'll start threading them through closest to this outside, poking it through, looping it back around. When doing your bass knob, what I like to do is take it and push it all the way to where it touches the amplifier here, and then tighten up my zip tie. The reason for that is if I need to unplug it, I have plenty of space to do that without it being too tight or stressing it or anything like that. Bass knob is in. Time to move on to our left and right front speaker wires. I've already prepped the harness for that. Just like the rears, I've put some braided loom over it, and then it goes into a taped harness. Put shrink wrap on the ends so we know gray is the passenger, white is the driver. This goes driver, passenger. Grounds are first, followed by positive, then ground, then positive. Loosen up the Phoenix connectors because they come full closed. Put your wires in and check for length. Trim them accordingly. Similar to the bass knob, I like to push these forward to make sure that we have enough wire extra here. If I need to unplug this, I can get it out. I'll be using the wire holes that I've already drilled to mark my area. Get the zip tie through the back, push these up into place. The head is going to be in the same direction as the bass knob. With one zip tie in, I can test to make sure this will come unplugged and plug back in fairly easy. If I need to, I can wiggle and adjust it just a little bit. Test it as many times as you're comfortable with, and then apply the rest of the zip ties. The last wire on this side is the sub wire. The sub wire uses an Allen key screw, and it is attached attached to the amplifier, unlike the others are not. For this, we've made up our subwire. I like to use a individual wire, meaning this is a red and a black. It does have red and black heat shrink on it. This goes through the braided loom. The reason why I like to use individual wiring as opposed to a solid piece of 12 gauge is that this has a lot more maneuverability to it, because it's not one piece of wire trying to bend like this. It's two separate pieces of wire that inside of this is very flexible. It just makes it easier for us to turn it at these angles. Test fit it. If it isn't going in far enough on your ferrule, you can cut them shorter. That seems to be a better depth. Following the same basic idea, even though this isn't going to be removable, I like to add in an arch here just to have a little bit of extra wire. Match up our holes to our previous ones on the other side. For this, cut these zip ties back out and stack this on top of it. There's no reason to keep going out because they're gonna have to be pulled into this anyways. Get the first zip tie into place. Check your bend, get it the way you want it, and tighten it down, cut it flush. Cut and remove the two zip ties that are already in place. There's 3 zip ties total that we'll be removing and reinstalling. Them lined up and at the right angles. Pull your zip tie tight and repeat it into the other 2. I've decided to put the subwire on the bottom and the speaker wires on the top. And the reasoning for that is that once this gets over into the corner, the subwire is going to go down, around, out to the subwoofer enclosure. That way I don't have to have them do this. I can just cross them now where it's nice, convenient, and looks better. And that finishes up this side of the amplifier. Now it is time for the RCAs.